I still remember the exact sound of her laugh. It was sharp, dry, almost pleased with my supposed foolishness. We were having dinner when I announced I had resigned. My son looked worried, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. But my daughter-in-law? She raised an eyebrow and smirked. She asked if I finally accepted I was old and useless. I simply sipped my tea and chose not to respond. She thought my silence meant confusion, not deliberate control. She started calculating out loud, as if I weren't there. "How will you pay your bills now, Evelyn?" she scoffed. Her voice carried that fake concern wrapped in real contempt. My son tried to change the subject, obviously uncomfortable. But she pressed on, saying retirement didn't suit impulsive people. I watched her, studying every gesture, every cruel little smile. She believed my future depended on her approval and control. Poor girl, she had no idea what was coming. Inside, I felt a mix of sadness and amusement. Sadness because my son had married someone so arrogant. Amusement because she really thought I had no plan. I had been underestimated many times in my life. Men, bosses, neighbors, even relatives thought I was naive. But age doesn't make you weaker. It makes you strategic. I had survived loss, poverty, and betrayal more than once. A mocking daughter-in-law wasn't going to break me. I decided, in that exact moment, to stay quiet. My silence made her even more confident and careless. She mistook my calm for weakness, my gentleness for fear. She thought she was 3 steps ahead of me financially. In her mind, my resignation meant dependence on their household. She imagined herself as the new manager of my money. She didn't know I had already moved everything carefully. She was playing checkers while I was finishing a chess game. My son squeezed my hand under the table gently. "Mom, are you sure?" he whispered with real worry. I looked into his eyes and nodded with certainty. "Yes, dear. I know exactly what I'm doing," responded. He didn't know about the letter waiting in my drawer. He didn't know about the conversations I had overheard. He only knew I had always stood back up after falling. This time would be no different, only much more quiet. As we cleared the table, she hummed a happy tune. She believed my decision would tie me to their mercy. She imagined me begging for help within a few months. She didn't know I had already prepared my escape route. She didn't know the paper that would change everything existed. That letter would expose her intentions and protect my legacy. She laughed that night like someone already celebrating a victory. But the winner of that story was not going to be her. Her questions had started months before that dinner. At first, they sounded like casual curiosity about my work. "How much do teachers earn these days, Evelyn?" she'd ask. "Do you still have good benefits at your age?" She smiled sweetly, but her eyes were measuring numbers. She pretended interest in my health, my fatigue, my schedule. But I could feel something cold behind her gentle tone. It wasn't care, it was calculation disguised as kindness. Then she began to push a bit more each week. "Have you ever thought about retiring and enjoying life? Why do you still work when you're already so old?" She emphasized the word old like it was a disease. Sometimes she'd mention how expensive things were becoming lately. Other times she would talk about family financial planning. Always circling around the same invisible point, my income. She wanted to know exactly what I had and where. I started paying attention to the details of her speech. She would mention my pension, as if it were already hers. She'd ask if my accounts had beneficiaries or written instructions. She'd say things like, "It's safer if everything is centralized." By centralized, she meant under my control. Of course. I had seen that pattern years ago with other people. First comes the exaggerated help, then comes the subtle domination. I refused to let that cycle repeat under my roof. So instead of answering her directly, I played along. I pretended to forget exact numbers and official terms. I said the bank confused me and paperwork exhausted me. Each time, her eyes lit up just a little more. She thought I was vulnerable, disorganized, easy to manipulate. She started suggesting we review things together someday soon. I smiled and said we would, while changing the subject. Meanwhile, I was printing documents and storing them somewhere safe. My son, on the other hand, wasn't suspicious at all. He thought she was being a responsible wife, just planning ahead. He didn't notice how she only asked questions when I was alone. He didn't see the way her tone shifted behind his back. He still believed she married him for love and partnership. I knew love was there, but mixed with ambition and hunger. Hunger not for growth, but for control and domination. And I would not feed that hunger with my life's work. By the time I finally resigned, my decision was complete. I had consulted a lawyer, rewritten my will entirely, and signed. I had placed every cent of my savings where she couldn't touch. I had chosen my grandson as my primary legal heir. I left clear clauses to protect him from anyone's greed. The letter she would later receive wasn't emotional, it was legal. It was the quiet sword I held behind my back. And she was walking straight toward the blade, laughing all the way. The turning point came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I arrived home earlier because a meeting had been canceled unexpectedly. When I opened the door, the house seemed empty at first. Then I heard her voice coming from the living room. She was on speakerphone, talking louder than she should. I stopped in the hallway, without making a sound at all. Her words floated through the air like poison in water. "She won't last long working like that, you'll see." I stayed hidden listening, my heart beating in my throat. "She's getting tired. When the retirement kicks in, it's ours." The way she said ours made my skin crawl with anger. She laughed, telling whoever it was about my age and health. "She doesn't even understand all that paperwork, poor thing." Poor thing. Those two words cut deeper than any insult. Not because they were true, but because she believed them. She thought I was too slow, too fragile, too easily misled. The person on the phone asked something I couldn't quite hear. She answered, "Of course, he trusts me. He thinks I'm helping." She went on bragging about how my son relied on her judgment. "How do you think I got him to agree to the house?" It was then I realized something I had feared silently. She wasn't just ambitious. She was manipulative and strategic. She didn't simply want comfort. She wanted control over everyone. And I was just the next piece on her board. I leaned on the wall, breathing slowly, studying my thoughts. I could have burst into the room and confronted her immediately. I could have shouted, exposed her, demanded respect right there. But years of life had taught me another kind of strength. Sometimes the loudest slap is the one given in silence. I decided to retreat, to leave without being noticed that day. I walked back outside, closed the door, and circled the block. When I returned, I made enough noise for her to hear. She greeted me with her usual sugary smile at the doorway. "Evelyn, you're home early. Did everything go well at work?" I smiled back, an entirely different smile from before. "Yes, dear. Everything went just as it should," responded. She had no idea that I now knew the truth. She had no idea that every future word would be measured. From that day on, nothing she said passed unnoticed. I was documenting her behavior in my memory like a ledger. That evening, I sat on my bed and thought clearly. The first step would be leaving my job on my terms. The second step would be securing my estate beyond her reach. The third step would be giving her just enough rope. Because some people don't believe fire burns until they touch it. I would let her laugh, mock, and underestimate me freely. And then, at the right moment, I would hand her the truth, folded inside a simple, ordinary envelope with my shaky handwriting. The next week, I scheduled a meeting with my supervisor. I walked into his office with my resignation letter in hand. He looked surprised but not entirely shocked, just quietly sad. "Evelyn, are you sure? You're one of our best." I smiled, feeling both nostalgia and relief washing over me. "Yes, I'm sure. It's time for me to close this chapter." He tried to insist, offering fewer hours or another position. But my decision had already been written in unshakable ink. After leaving the office, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I took a bus downtown and walked to a building. It was old, with brass doors and a modest marble lobby. There, on the third floor, was my lawyer's office. We sat down, reviewed every clause, every signature, every detail. He spoke slowly, making sure I understood all the protections. Once satisfied, I signed the final version of my new will. With that, my future and my grandsons felt safely guarded. I made sure the document was registered and stored properly. One official copy went to my lawyer's archive for safety. Another was kept in a secure box at the bank. A third copy I kept hidden in my own belongings. Not all in the same place, never entirely accessible to others. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being a responsible old woman. Life had taught me that paper sometimes speaks louder than words. And this paper would speak very loudly when the time came. It was then that I drafted the letter for her. Not a long, emotional confession, but something precise. I explained that I had resigned because everything was settled, that my assets had been redistributed and legally protected. I stated clearly that my grandson was my primary heir now, and that there were specific clauses preventing any misuse of funds. I wrote it calmly, almost tenderly, like closing a diary. Then I placed that copy of the will neatly inside. On the envelope, I wrote her name in big letters. Not my daughter-in-law, but her full legal name. I wanted her to feel the weight of formality and law. This wasn't a family argument. This was a decision. I sealed the envelope, pressed my fingers on the flap. It felt like sealing a chapter of survival and self-respect. That letter was not meant to start a war at all. It was meant to make sure I never became her victim. On my way back home, I felt strangely light. The city noise seemed softer, and the sky looked wider. I wasn't rich, but I had something far more valuable. I had control over my own story and my own ending. As the bus rattled along, I thought of my younger self. How many times I had stayed quiet to keep peace. This time, I would still be quiet, but not defenseless. Silence, backed by paper and law, can be thunderous. Saturday dinner had become a small family tradition for us. Usually we talked about groceries, work, and neighborhood gossip. But that night, I knew things wouldn't follow routine. I had the envelope tucked carefully inside my cardigan pocket. My hands were steady. My decision had already been made. I helped set the table, listening to their usual small talk. She was complaining about prices, responsibilities, and her busy life. I just smiled and stirred the mashed potatoes without a word. When we finally sat down, my son served everyone politely. He asked about my week, his tone genuinely loving and curious. I answered gently, kept it light, and smiled at him. Then, in the middle of a pause, I spoke clearly. I quit my job this week, I said calmly and softly. My son's hand froze around his glass, eyes widening in shock. My daughter-in-law's reaction, however, was immediate and cruel. She threw her head back and laughed right there at the table. It wasn't a laugh of surprise. It was one of victory. She looked at my son and said, "See? I told you." "Told him what, dear?" I asked, tilting my head mildly. "That you wouldn't last much longer working like that," she replied. Her eyes were bright with sick satisfaction and hidden greed. She said now we really needed to sit and organize things. "You know, Evelyn, money doesn't manage itself at your age." I felt my son tense, but he stayed quiet, torn and conflicted. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't explain anything. Instead, I slowly reached into my cardigan and pulled the envelope. I placed it on the tablecloth, right in front of her plate. "For you," I said, with a small, almost sweet smile. She frowned, confused, wiping her fingers before touching it. "What is this?" she asked, sounding both curious and annoyed. "Something you might want to read alone. Rispondi calmamente." Her fingers tightened slightly around the paper as she stared. My son looked from me to her with visible confusion. "Why alone?" he asked, his voice already touched by worry. I gave him the gentlest look I could manage that moment. "Because some things are better faced without an audience, dear." I took another bite of my food as if it were nothing. She rolled her eyes, trying to see it as harmless drama. But I watched the tiny flicker of unease pass over her face. Part of her knew that envelope was not an empty gesture. The rest of dinner went on strangely quiet and mechanical. She barely touched her food, fingers grazing the envelope constantly. My son tried to start new conversations, but they fell flat. I answered politely, but my mind was already at the finish line. At the end, she picked up the envelope and held it tightly. "I'll read it later," she muttered, pretending not to care. "Take your time," I answered, pushing my chair back slowly. Outside, the wind howled softly, like it already knew the ending. The next morning, the envelope was still unopened. I noticed it on the dresser in the living room. She had placed it there like a ticking, silent bomb. She passed by it several times while cleaning and tidying. Her eyes flicked toward it, then quickly away every time. Fear and curiosity were wrestling inside her restless mind. She didn't know if opening it would bring power or ruin. That uncertainty was already giving me all the advantage. My son went about his Sunday, as usual, unaware. He read the newspaper, fixed a loose cabinet door, hummed. He had no idea the future of our family had shifted. He didn't see the shadows in his wife's expression. He didn't notice the cold way she looked at the envelope. That small rectangle of paper was now heavier than gold. It carried the truth about what I had done quietly, and about what she had hoped to gain for herself. As for me, I spent the morning in my room. I brewed tea, sorted through old photographs, and breathed slowly. I didn't feel guilty, angry, or vengeful in any way. I felt resolved, like closing a book after finishing its story. What I had written in that letter was not spiteful. It was simply the truth, dressed in formal language and clarity. She would either accept it in silence or explode in rage. Either way, I had already secured my steps long before. Around afternoon, I heard her footsteps pacing the hallway. Up and down, back and forth, wooden boards creaking constantly. There was a slight tremor in the rhythm of her walk, the kind that comes when someone's mind is screaming internally. She knew that envelope was my answer to all her questions. She also knew she had pushed too far with her greed. So now she feared what I might have seen and understood. Fear fits badly on people used to feeling superior. At one point, she came to my door and hesitated. I heard her breathing there, just behind the thin wood. She almost knocked, then didn't, then stepped away silently. I smiled sadly, staring at the teacup in my hands. She wanted reassurance before facing whatever waited in that letter. But I wasn't going to offer comfort for someone's manipulation. Some lessons in life come without a gentle warning. This was her lesson, and it had already begun. By evening, I saw that the envelope was gone. Her hands had finally surrendered to curiosity and fear. I didn't know when she would open it, night, morning, later. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty deep inside. Once she read it, there would be no going back anymore. The illusions she held about my weakness would be shattered. Her laughter from the previous night would echo differently then. Because the joke was never on me, it was on her. That night, the house was unusually quiet after dinner. My son went to bed early, tired from a long work week. I stayed in my room, pretending to read an old novel. But every sense in me was awake, listening for movement. After a while, I heard her bedroom door close upstairs softly. Then came the rustle of something being moved on a dresser. And finally, the unmistakable sound of an envelope being torn. That simple rip echoed louder in my heart than any shout. There was a pause, long and heavy, like held breath. No footsteps, no voices, no nervous pacing in the hallway. Just silence, thick enough to feel through the ceiling beams. I imagined her eyes moving over each line slowly, terrified. Her mind racing, her illusions collapsing with every sentence. The future she had built in her head breaking apart quietly. She had wanted control of my retirement and my inheritance. Instead, she had discovered she would never touch a single cent. I pictured her face turning paler with every paragraph read. I knew exactly which part would hit her the hardest. Not the mention of my resignation or my lawyer's name, but the line where I stated my only direct heir clearly. My grandson will be the sole beneficiary of my estate, and the clause that barred spouses from accessing those funds. I could almost feel the panic rising in her chest upstairs. It was the kind of fear that destroys sleep for many nights. Still, I stayed where I was, eyes on the same page. I didn't move, didn't walk toward the hallway to listen closer. I gave her the space to face that truth alone in private. That letter wasn't written to humiliate her publicly at all. It was written to tell her, silently, that I had seen everything. Her curiosity, her greed, her little questions over many months. Now she finally understood that I hadn't been blind or confused. I had simply been quiet while putting my protections in place. After a long time, I heard the soft creak of floorboards. She walked slowly, carefully, like someone moving underwater. I heard the bathroom door open, then the sound of running water. Maybe she splashed her face, trying to hide the redness of crying. Maybe she stared into the mirror, seeing herself differently now. Not as the clever planner controlling an old woman's future, but as someone who had seriously underestimated the quietest person. Age may wrinkle the skin, but it sharpens a different kind of blade. Eventually, the house fell completely silent again for the night. I closed my book gently and turned off the bedside lamp. In the dark, I whispered a short prayer for my grandson. That he would grow up in a home with more honesty than this. That he would learn respect not through pain, but through example. But life rarely gives us ideal lessons wrapped in kindness. Sometimes people only learn the shape of consequences when hurt. And my daughter-in-law had just met hers in black and white. The next morning, the air at breakfast felt heavier than usual. My son greeted me with his normal warmth, kissing my forehead. But she avoided my eyes completely, moving stiffly around the kitchen. Her face looked swollen, like someone who hadn't slept all night. She poured coffee with trembling hands, spilling drops on the table. "Rough night?" I asked gently, stirring sugar into my cup. She froze for a second, then forced a weak, plastic smile. I'm fine," she lied, her voice thinner than usual. My son noticed the tension and glanced between us carefully. "Is everything okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual and calm. I took a slow sip and nodded before answering him softly. "I'm perfectly fine, dear. I slept very peacefully last night." He relaxed a bit, but she gripped her cup tighter nervously. She knew exactly what those words really meant underneath. I was at peace because my decision was already made, and because she no longer had a path to my money. Throughout the day, her behavior changed in small, obvious ways. She hovered closer when I moved around the house doing chores. She offered help with things she usually ignored or delegated. "Do you need anything, Evelyn? Are you comfortable enough?" Her words were suddenly overly kind, almost sticky with effort. But kindness born from fear has a very different taste. It doesn't come from the heart. It leaks from desperation. And no amount of sweetness could erase what she had already planned. I noticed she also started guarding her phone more obsessively. No more loud speakerphone calls in the living room like before. No more casual laughing conversations about our future money. She'd step outside, close doors, speak in lower tones constantly. It was ironic, really. She should have guarded her intentions earlier. Now, the only person she was truly hiding from was herself. She didn't want to face the version of her I had seen. The version that wanted to turn my retirement into her playground. At lunchtime, my son tried to lighten the mood with small jokes. He talked about work, the neighbor's dog, and his favorite shows. I laughed with him, answered, and tried to keep things lighthearted. But there was no softness in his wife's eyes at all. Only agitation, guilt, and the constant weight of that letter. At one point he asked her directly, "Did you read it?" She stiffened, fork in midair, and nodded slowly once. "Yeah, it was a lot," she replied, unable to say more. I watched her carefully, then spoke with calm clarity again. Honesty can feel heavy when we weren't ready to carry it. She looked at me, eyes wide, lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, didn't fake confusion. Because there was nothing left to pretend about between us. She knew that I knew, and I knew that she knew I knew. That triangle of awareness had locked us into a fragile truce. But even fragile truces can explode if stepped on too hard. That afternoon, she finally gathered the courage to knock. 3 soft taps on my bedroom door, hesitant and unsure. I was folding laundry on the bed when I heard it. Come in, I said calmly, without looking up right away. She stepped in slowly, closing the door carefully behind her. For once, she didn't walk like the queen of the house. She walked like a child called to explain a broken window. Her shoulders were rounded, and her eyes were filled with fear. She stood there silently for a few seconds, twisting her fingers. Evelyn, about the letter, she began, voice barely above a whisper. I placed the last folded towel on the pile and faced her. Yes, dear? Did something in it confuse you, in any way? Her throat bobbed as she struggled to find the right words. I think you misunderstood me, that's all, she finally said. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled as she forced it. I was just worried about you, that's why I asked things. I sat on the edge of the bed and tilted my head gently. Worried about me, or worried about what I had? I asked. Her eyes flashed with panic for a second before she looked away. She denied it quickly, but her voice cracked in the middle. I would never try to take advantage of you, Evelyn. But both of us knew that sentence wasn't entirely true. The letter had shown her exactly how I perceived her actions. And that perception wasn't based on imagination but on patterns. She moved closer and knelt partly, like someone bargaining. If I said anything wrong before, I'm really, truly sorry. Her apology was careful, measured, shaped to sound convincing. But there was something missing from it, real humility and remorse. It felt like she was defending her access more than my feelings. Her eyes checked my face repeatedly, searching for a weak point. She wanted to know if there was space to renegotiate boundaries. I let the silence stretch long enough to make her uncomfortable. Finally, I spoke in a low but steady voice to her. I didn't write that letter to punish you or embarrass you. I wrote it because I heard things you never expected me to. Her hands froze in mid-motion, eyes filling slowly with tears. I heard you talk about my retirement as if it were yours. I heard you count money you never worked a day for. Her tears slipped down, but I didn't reach out to wipe them. Some truths are meant to touch a person without softening first. She whispered, So you hate me now, like a scared teenager. I shook my head slowly, surprising her with the answer. No, I don't hate you. Hatred wastes energy I need elsewhere. What I do is respect myself enough to protect what is mine. You showed me your intentions, I responded by drawing a line. She covered her face with her hands and let out a sob. That was the first honest reaction I had seen in days. But tears alone wouldn't change the documents I had already signed. A few days passed, and the atmosphere remained heavy and strange. My daughter-in-law became unusually quiet whenever we were together. She cooked more, cleaned more, and tried to be overly accommodating. My son, however, sensed that something deeper was very wrong. He'd walk into a room and feel conversations die instantly. He'd catch unfinished glances between his wife and his mother. He didn't yet know about the content of the letter fully, but he knew it had created a fracture no one wanted to name. One evening, he came to my room while she was bathing. He closed the door behind him gently, staying by the dresser. Mom, he began, rubbing his forehead with his fingers. What exactly was in that letter you gave her? I studied his face, the boy I raised, now a grown man. His eyes carried fatigue, worry, and a quiet kind of fear. Fear of choosing sides between the two women he loved. I sighed softly, knowing this moment would come sooner or later. I wrote down decisions I had already made about my future, I said. He frowned slightly, trying to understand more clearly. What kind of decisions? He asked, voice low and careful. Financial and legal ones mostly, I replied without drama. I didn't want anyone assuming things that were never guaranteed. He sat on the chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Is this about your will? He whispered, as if afraid of the word. I nodded slow, not taking my eyes off his. He exhaled sharply, processing everything in silence for a moment. So she read that and then started acting like this, he muttered. His hands tightened together, knuckles turning white slightly. Has she done something to make you feel unsafe or pressured? I thought of all the small questions, the greedy laughter, the plans. She tried to treat my life's work as a future bank account, I said. I simply made sure she couldn't, no matter how hard she tried. He closed his eyes briefly, shame washing over his tired expression. I'm so sorry, Mom, he said, voice breaking just a little. I should have noticed if she was crossing a line with you. I shook my head gently and reached for his hand quietly. You're not responsible for every decision your wife makes. You love her, and love can be blind to certain corners. I didn't tell you earlier because I wanted proof, not suspicion. I handled it the safest way I knew how, as quietly as possible. He nodded, but guilt still flickered behind his wounded eyes. He stood up, pacing slowly across the room, deep in thought. Does she know about the part with our son? He asked eventually. Yes, I answered firmly, holding his gaze without flinching. I wanted her to understand that my priority is his future. I won't leave him at the mercy of anyone's ambition. He swallowed hard, a strange mixture of relief and sadness inside. Thank you for protecting him, Mom, he whispered, almost hoarse. In that moment, I knew he had finally begun to see her clearly. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom upstairs. Voices low at first, then slowly rising in intensity and pain. My son was demanding answers, his patience stretched to the limit. He wanted to know why she had been so shaken by my letter. He wanted to understand why she had avoided eye contact for days. He kept asking, what did you do for her to write that? She responded with half-truths, rehearsed shock, and broken phrases. But lies crumble fast when pushed by someone who knows your heart. I just didn't think she'd cut us out like that, she cried. Her choice of words didn't go unnoticed by him at all. Us. Or you? He asked with quiet, sharp clarity. Silence followed, heavy and accusing between every word. He had always been gentle, but not stupid or completely blind. Now her reactions, her nervousness, and her past comments aligned. He remembered her earlier obsession with my finances suddenly. The pieces of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to solve clicked together. He asked her, did you ever talk about her money behind her back? She hesitated, which was the loudest answer she could have given. He repeated the question, this time more firmly and clearly. Did you plan anything with what she might leave one day? Her crying grew louder, mixing guilt with frustrated defensiveness. I just wanted us to be safe, she finally admitted in tears. Safe or comfortable? He countered, cutting through her excuses. She didn't have a clean answer to that question anymore. Downstairs, I sat in the dimly lit living room listening quietly. I wasn't eavesdropping for pleasure. I was checking for danger. I needed to know whether things would escalate into cruelty. If he started to shout or she became physically aggressive. But their argument stayed verbal, emotional, and intensely raw. Two people facing the ugly intersection of love and ambition. I felt a tug of sadness for both of them in that moment. Because truth, when it arrives, rarely does so gently or politely. Eventually, his footsteps came down the stairs, slow and heavy. He found me awake in the living room, knitting a little calmly. Couldn't sleep, he asked, though we both knew the reason. Old bones don't need much rest, I replied with a small shrug. He sat next to me, elbows on his knees, eyes red and tired. She admitted she was counting on your money for our future, he said. There was pain in his voice, but also a growing firmness. He was beginning to reclaim his own judgment from her influence. I put my hand on his back, rubbing small circles gently. Some people see others as people, and some see them as resources. We don't always realize who's who until money enters the room. He nodded, swallowing hard, his jaw clenched in quiet anger. I don't want you to feel obligated to leave us anything, he said. I only want you to feel safe, respected, and peaceful here. His words were the balm I hadn't known I still needed. In that moment, my heart reminded me why I was fighting. In the days that followed, the house felt like two separate worlds. One where my son and I talked, cooked, and shared simple moments. And another where his wife moved like a guilty shadow around us. She spoke less, avoided direct conversations, and watched everything. Her laughter, once loud and dominant, had completely disappeared. In its place was a quiet, tense woman afraid of her own reflection. She had lost more than potential inheritance. She had lost face. Face in front of her husband and face in front of me. She started treating my grandson with an exaggerated tenderness. Too many kisses, too many gifts, too many sugary apologies. Children can feel when something isn't truly natural or honest. He would pull away sometimes, confused by her sudden intensity. I watched carefully, not to judge, but to understand her behavior. She wasn't loving him. She was trying to hold on to influence. If she couldn't reach me through money anymore, she'd try through him. But Mywell had already made my intentions crystal clear legally. One afternoon, she approached me while my son was at work. Her eyes were swollen again, like someone living in constant anxiety. "Evelyn, do you think I'm a monster?" she asked bluntly. The question surprised me with its naked honesty and fear. For a moment, I saw not a scheming woman, but a frightened girl. Someone who realized she had pushed too far and been exposed. I thought carefully before answering, choosing each word with care. "I think you got lost confusing security with control," I said. She sat down across from me, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. "I grew up with nothing," she whispered, staring at her hands. "My parents always depended on others, always begging, always lacking. I swore I would never live like that, never be that weak." Her fear of poverty had twisted itself into hunger for power. She had learned to see people's resources before seeing their hearts. I understood the wound, but couldn't ignore the damage caused. Pain explains behavior sometimes, but it never fully excuses it. "I was scared of us failing," she continued, voice trembling softly. "Scared of losing the house, scared of not giving him the best. That fear turned everyone around me into potential insurance." I listened, letting her spill her truth without interruption at all. But when she finally looked up, searching my face for absolution, I didn't rush to comfort her or erase what had happened. "You had a choice," I said gently. "Fear or integrity. You chose fear first. Now you must choose, he'll be next." She nodded slowly, tears forming again but not falling yet. "I know I can't ask you to change the will," she murmured. "And I won't," I answered calmly, removing any remaining doubt. "That document isn't about punishing you. It's about protecting him. It's about making sure my grandson is never leverage for anyone." She swallowed, accepting that truth like a bitter but necessary medicine. In that moment, something in her finally stopped fighting reality. Whether she would truly change, only time and actions would tell. Eventually, the unspoken tension became too heavy to ignore. My son suggested we sit down together one evening after dinner. Not a shouted confrontation, but a clear, calm conversation. We gathered at the table where everything had started weeks before. The same table where she first laughed at my resignation openly. The envelope was gone, but its contents hovered in the air. My grandson was already asleep, so this was just for adults. 3 people, 1 truth, and a future to decide consciously. My son began by taking responsibility for his own blindness. "I should have noticed sooner how your questions were changing," he said. He looked at his wife, not with hatred, but with wounded honesty. "I thought you were just being practical about our finances. I didn't realize you were building plans around my mother's money." She tried to speak, but emotion clogged her throat completely. He raised a hand gently, asking her to let him finish. This affected not just us, but her trust and peace. Then he turned to me, eyes full of remorse and love. "Mom, I'm sorry if in any way I contributed to your worry. I never want you to feel like a burden in this house. You are not an obligation. We are blessed to have you here." Hearing those words, my heart softened despite all the pain. Because that acknowledgement was what I had long needed to hear. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Thank you, dear. That means more than you realize," I replied. His wife finally spoke up, voice shaky, but clearer than before. "I was wrong," she said, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "I let my fear of not having enough turn into greed. I saw your retirement as a safety net that wasn't mine. I asked questions that crossed boundaries and disrespected you. She paused, breathing deeply, then continued more steadily. And the worst part is, I laughed when you made your decision. That laugh. I regret it every single day since then. I listened to her confession, hearing both truth and struggle. Apologies are easy to say, but hard to truly live afterward. So I didn't rush to say it's okay like many would. Because it wasn't okay, not yet, maybe not ever completely. What I could do was recognize her effort to face herself. You hurt me, I said plainly, but you also taught me. You taught me to stop assuming goodwill where there isn't any. And to finally protect myself on paper, not just in prayer. There at that table, I made something else very clear. I won't remove the will or change its main structure, I said. My grandson's future will remain protected exactly as it is. That decision is not up for negotiation anymore at all. But I am willing to see who you become after this. Not through promises, but through consistent behavior over time. She nodded, understanding that forgiveness and trust are not synonyms. Trust, once broken, is rebuilt slowly, if rebuilt at all. Later that week, my son asked to see a copy of the will. Not because he doubted me, but because he needed clarity. We sat together at the kitchen table with the document between us. He read each line, each clause, each carefully chosen word. His eyes lingered on the section about guardianship and access, where it stated clearly that any spouse wouldn't control the funds, that everything would be in a trust for my grandson's benefit, handled by neutral professionals, not by family politics or pressure. When he finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. So this is what she saw that night, he murmured softly. She saw a future where she couldn't use our son like leverage. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry at what could have happened. If you hadn't done this, she might have pushed you harder, he said. Maybe even guilt you into signing things you didn't understand. I nodded, because that was exactly what I had feared quietly. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through intuition. I explained to him the deeper meaning of my decision. It's not about cutting you out emotionally as my child, I said. It's about freeing you from the weight of expectations after I'm gone. People fight over money. They turn grief into competition quickly. I don't want you stuck between your wife and your mother's memory. I want everything to be so clear that no one can twist it. He listened closely, absorbing not just the legal but the emotional part. I saw relief spread across his features as understanding deepened. He reached for my hand again, squeezing it with quiet intensity. Thank you for not putting me in that kind of position, he said. I've seen families destroyed by inheritance and selfishness before. I don't want that to be our story when you're gone someday. His words stung a little, because no one likes to imagine their absence. But they also soothed me, because he grasped my real intention. I wasn't trying to punish him or punish her with this will. I was trying to protect the love that still existed between us. She told me she felt betrayed when she read it, he added softly. I smiled sadly at that choice of word and shook my head. People feel betrayed when their secret expectations aren't met, I said. She expected your mother's money to be part of her plans. But she forgot something very simple and true about me. I didn't work my whole life for someone else's comfort. I worked for survival, dignity, and your future before anything. And now for your son's future, not your wife's lifestyle. We finished our conversation with a kind of quiet agreement. He would not pressure me to change anything in the will. He would also not weaponize it in future fights with his wife. Because pain used as a weapon only creates more broken pieces. Instead, he would use this as a mirror to reflect on their relationship, to see if they were truly building something honest together, or if they had allowed fear and greed to infect their partnership. The letter had started as my protection, but it became his wake-up call. One evening, I found her sitting alone on the back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft orange and pink. She was staring at nothing, lost somewhere inside her thoughts. Her cheeks were wet, but she wasn't actively crying anymore. She looked smaller somehow, not in size but in spirit, like someone whose armor had finally cracked under its own weight. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped outside and joined her. The wooden boards creaked lightly under my careful footsteps. She didn't look at me right away, just wiped her face quickly. "You were right to protect yourself," she said quietly at last. Her voice held no sarcasm, no manipulation, just tired truth. "I've been thinking a lot about what kind of woman I became. I didn't start out this way, she added softly. Life scared me into believing money was the only true safety. So I started seeing opportunities instead of people, even here." It was the rawest confession I had heard from her so far. "I can't change what you wrote or did," she continued slowly. "And I won't ask you to, not anymore, not ever again. I just don't want a grandson to grow up hating me." There it was, the fear beneath all the other fears. Not just losing money or access, but losing genuine connection. Because children, when grown, eventually learn the full stories. They'll ask who respected whom and who took advantage. And no amount of pretended kindness can hide the long-term truth. I took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the evening air. "I don't want him to grow up hating anyone," I replied honestly. "I want him to grow up learning from our mistakes, not repeating them. I won't erase what happened, but I can move forward differently. That depends less on my will and more on your daily choices. Whether you treat him as a person, not as an extension or guarantee. Whether you treat me as family, not as a retirement plan waiting." She nodded, absorbing each sentence like a much-needed medicine. She turned to me finally, eyes red but clearer than before. "Would you ever be able to forgive me, truly?" she asked. I thought about that question for a long, silent moment. "Forgiveness is something I give for my own heart's sake," I said. "I don't want to carry resentment. It poisons the one who holds it. But forgiveness doesn't mean I undo my protections or forget. It means I recognize your humanity and my own boundaries together." Her shoulders softened, as if a heavy stone had been slightly lifted. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the sky darken. The first stars appeared, faint and delicate against the blue. "I don't laugh about your decisions anymore," she said quietly. "I've learned the hard way that underestimating you was my biggest mistake." A small, almost sad smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "I hope you've learned something even bigger than that," I answered. "That respect is not a favor you give to elders, it's a duty. And when that duty is ignored, life has a way of correcting it." Time passed, and our lives slowly found a new rhythm. My daughter-in-law was no longer the loudest voice at the table. She still talked, still planned, still had her opinions. But there was a new caution woven into everything she said. She thought twice before making jokes about age or dependence. She no longer asked about my accounts, pensions, or paperwork. The subject of my money became invisible, as it should have been. We focused more on shared meals, school events, and small moments. My grandson grew older, curious, lively, and incredibly observant. He would climb onto my lap and ask me stories about my past. I told him about working hard, saving slowly, surviving quietly. Not in a way that made him fear life, but respect effort. I never spoke badly of his mother in front of him once. But I made sure he understood one simple principle early. People who truly love you protect you, not your things. Their concern is your heart, not your bank account. As for my son, he became more attentive and aware at home. He started asking his wife deeper questions about their goals. They went to counseling for a while to rebuild damaged trust. They worked on the roots of fear and control together slowly. I watched from a distance, not interfering, only observing silently. It wasn't my place to dictate their marriage's future direction. My place was to guard my own peace and my grandson's security. And I had already done that in the most effective way possible. Every now and then, I'd catch my daughter-in-law looking at me, not with the old superiority, but with something like respect. Maybe also a hint of lingering shame and reluctant admiration. She had laughed at me once, believing I was clueless and weak. But it was a letter, not a fight, that changed everything. Words on paper, legally bound and calmly written, did what shouting couldn't. They drew a line no one could cross without consequence anymore. And she had learned exactly how sharp quiet boundaries can be. That mocking smile she wore the night I announced my resignation, it never truly returned in the same way after that day. She still smiled, laughed, and enjoyed her life as people do. But that specific smile, the one built on my supposed weakness, vanished. Because weakness was never really what she saw in me. It was what she needed to believe to justify her own plans. The letter stripped her of that illusion with surgical precision, leaving only the truth standing between us, firm and undeniable. In the end, I didn't win because I was cruel or vindictive. I won because I chose respect for myself over their expectations. I chose to act before I was forced into a corner of dependence. I chose to protect my grandson from a future of hidden manipulation. And I chose a quiet weapon, a letter she could never unread. My daughter-in-law laughed when I quit my job, thinking I was lost. But she wasn't prepared for the words that waited inside that envelope. Words that wiped the smile from her face and restored mine.